The family affair. That's what tonight's show might come to be known as. The reality of Twitter is one of my first topics this evening. The family with the largest shareholding in Twitter. That's right, the Al Saud ruling dictatorship in Saudi Arabia are the main owners of Twitter and have just sentenced a former English student to 34 years in prison for tweeting. Yes, I know, but Russia. And it's a family affair in the White House also. After the disgrace of the President of the United States' son, Hunter Biden, the man who was paid $50,000 a month for not working for a Ukrainian company when his father was the Vice President of the United States, otherwise known as the big guy, and he's an even bigger guy now that he's the president. Hunter Biden, exposed on his own laptop as a common criminal, a crack smoking, prostitute using common criminal. Well, now there's the daughter of Joe Biden, who said in her own diary, in her own hand, confirmed by the FBI as her own hand, that her father, the President of the United States of America, frequently took inappropriate showers with her. But nobody's talking about it because, hey, Putin, hey, Russia, but we're going to talk about that and other uncomfortable things here on the Galloway Show, only on YouTube. It's no budget television, just my good wife Gayatri and me, but we do our best midweek to bring you the news that's breaking or ought to be breaking. And the main topic I want to talk about this evening lies in the latter category, i.e. ought to be breaking, but is instead being managed in microcosm. Well, let me start with that. The British government and the Canadian government have refused to comment on the results of a BBC investigation broken by the London Times newspaper. So the two flagships of British corporate media have been chosen as the sewer of choice of a story that stinks to high heaven, and one which, if it were to be widely known across the Anglosphere, would be very problematic indeed for the governments of the United States and the government of Canada, not to mention the government of the United Kingdom, which covered the entire thing up. Here's the story. Shamima Begum, a hate figure in Britain, was once a young schoolgirl in my former constituency of Bethnal Green and Bow. One day she upped and went with two of her young schoolgirl friends and ended up in Syria, in ISIS, and got into some of the ugliest scenes ever known in the modern history of media, where film pictures of her holding up a severed head finally became available. She was in the maelstrom of head cutting, throat cutting, head chopping, beheading, heart eating, and mass murder and enslavement of Yazidi girls and others by the miscreants known as the Islamic State. The people who brought us these images thought that they would terrorize the world and win the day in the battle they were then fighting against the government in Baghdad and the government in Damascus of Iraq and Syria, respectively. They failed in both cases but not for the want of trying. Shamima Begum became the best known of those who ran away from school in East London and from many other parts of the world to go and become ISIS brides. For the avoidance of doubt, let me make this plain. I despise Shamima Begum. I despise ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Indeed, I'm the person who said from the first day of Shamima Begum's capture that she and all of the other ISIS prisoners should be handed over to the government of Syria to be dealt with according to Syrian law for the crimes that they undoubtedly committed on Syrian territory, which cost the lives of hundreds of thousands of people, the vast majority of them fellow Muslims, but including Syrian Christians by the hundred, if not the thousand, including Syrian Christian priests and nuns and even bishops. They included also, of course, a relatively small number, but nonetheless heartbreaking number of Western hostages taken by ISIS and Al-Qaeda and the rest of the alphabet soup at large and at work in Syria at that time. These journalists and aid workers were murdered in the most brutal fashion imaginable, and all of it captured in gory technicolor on camera. It was a chapter in human history which will frighten people in centuries to come. Such was the level of its barbarism. I'm proud of the fact that I stood by shoulder to shoulder with the secular Syrian Arab Republic, which prevailed thanks to the heroism of its own army, but thanks also to the heroism of its allies, its Lebanese allies, its Iranian allies, and most particularly its Russian allies. And much of the hatred of Russia in Western capitals over the last decade can be directly linked to the pivotal role played by Russia in defeating ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria. But back to Shamima Begum. Her parents woke up one day to discover that she had not gone to school but had gone to Syria instead. Her parents and those of her two school chums discovered that their children had been effectively groomed, effectively kidnapped, not of an age to give consent for what they did and where they went, but were groomed by others and taken to be delivered as ISIS brides. And most of them ended up widowed brides with children and ending up in camps where they are currently held prisoner, now years after the peak of the war. The British government removed Shamima Begum's citizenship so that she would not be brought back to Britain to stand trial. And now we know why. Thanks to the investigation of the BBC and the Times, we know that she was declared persona non grata by Britain because Britain could not afford to have Shamima Begum in court. Because it turns out, according to the BBC and the London Times, that Shamima Begum was taken from the streets of Bethnal Green and delivered to ISIS in ISIS-occupied Syria by an agent of the Canadian intelligence services. And that the British government, upon learning of this, agreed with the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, that they would cover up the entire sordid, sensational story. Now, this is not a story of who, what, where, and why for, but it is a story of why. I could go into all of the details of the individual who was operating for Canadian intelligence inside ISIS and traveling repeatedly to Jordan to hand over his intelligence, including the passport photographs of Shamima Begum and her friends, acquired by him because he brought them over the border from Turkey and delivered them to ISIS. But I'm not so interested in him. I'm not so interested in the monkeys. I'm interested in the organ grinders. I'm demanding an inquiry into why Canadian intelligence helped to smuggle a schoolgirl from London to ISIS in Syria. And I'm demanding an inquiry into why the British government covered it up. There's a backstory to this into which I will shortly turn. But before leaving the issue of Shamima Begum, I can bring you information not yet public knowledge. The reason why this story has been broken today, I say not broken, but being broken today, in a carefully managed intelligence operation to give this very bad news the softest landing it could possibly get, is that the Turkish authorities, perhaps as a result of Turkey's new policy in Syria, or perhaps as a result of something else, perhaps revenge by Turkey for something else, who knows? But the Turkish authorities, who have custody of this Canadian intelligence officer, were about to make public the role played by Canadian intelligence in supplying brides and fighters to ISIS in Syria. I can bring you other news that is not yet known, that the family lawyer of Shamima Begum supplied all of this information to the then relevant British minister Sajid Javid 5 years ago, and that Sajid Javid completely ignored it, refused to comment on it, refused to engage with it. And I'll give you also some news. This story turns the legal tables completely. No court in England will uphold the British government's decision to remove citizenship from Shamima Begum. So we will have to accept this terrorist back into our country as a result of the British government's lying by omission in the cover-up of the Canadian role in supplying ISIS in Syria with brides and with fighters. Now, you are probably now asking the question I'm asking. Why? Well, the importance of this story is not the character of Shamima Begum. The importance of this story is not about Shamima Begum at all. It's about the why. Why was Canada, and by extension Britain and the United States, shipping money, weapons, and it now turns out terrorist fighters directly from the streets of European capitals into the blood-soaked maw of the ISIS Al-Qaeda regime change attempt in Damascus? Well, that's where we come to the backstory. It was a decision made by Western governments that they would rather have ISIS and Al-Qaeda in power in Damascus on the Mediterranean than to tolerate an independent, secular Arab nationalist government led by Bashar al-Assad. For the same reason that Britain, France, and the United States helped to overthrow Gaddafi in Libya, they preferred to have the alphabet soup of the ISIS Al-Qaeda throat-cutting gang in power in Tripoli. They hoped, didn't turn out that way. There's now 5 governments in Libya, but they would rather have had ISIS and Al-Qaeda in power in Tripoli than an independent, secular Arab nationalist leader like Gaddafi. For the same reason that they supported the fathers of the Taliban in Afghanistan throughout the 1980s, on the principle that my enemy's enemy is my friend. We built up the gang of Islamist fanatics in Afghanistan, gave them money, guns, and political and propaganda support. I could go on, but time is against me. I could go right back to the 1950s, when Britain, principally Britain, gave birth to the now notorious and banned Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. Why? On the principle that they would rather have an Islamist government in Cairo than an independent Arab nationalist leader like Gamal Abdel Nasser, who was coming to power at the head of the young officers movement in Egypt at that time. And that's for the same reason that we're supporting openly Nazi fascist forces in Ukraine today. We're ready to give them unlimited guns and money, political and propaganda support. We're even ready to destroy our own economies in order to fulfill the now age-old principle that my enemy's enemy is my friend. As I said to David Cameron in Parliament once, did you read Frankenstein's monster? If so, did you read it to the end? Don't you realize that when you make a monster, it's no longer under your control? That's why it's called a monster. And the endless policy of building Islamist fanatic terrorist armies around the world to be used against governments we don't like has indeed exploded in our own faces. It exploded in the Manchester Arena, a mile from where I was that evening, and tore apart dozens of our children. Explosives strapped to the back of a UK government asset, a family of terrorists paid by the British government to be in Manchester, waiting for the day that they could be sent to Libya to overthrow Gaddafi, apparently oblivious to the fact that these monsters we created would one day come back and murder our own children, as they have done across Europe and will do so again. The very people that we built up will explode themselves again and again amongst our own children and murder them. Our own wives and children at a Christmas market in Germany or somewhere else will be mowed down by a truck driven by a madman from an organization that we ourselves have built up. And now we have the proof. Shamima Begum is the proof. If we needed any further evidence, we now know that the oh so achingly liberal government of Justin Trudeau, a liberal, had his intelligence service ferrying terrorists and brides for the terrorists from European capitals to the murder hellholes held by ISIS, to Raqqa, where the streets were running with blood, Western hostage blood, Syrian blood, terrorists murdering each other blood. We were supplying them with fresh fighters and brides, schoolgirls, to sleep with them. Oh, how achingly liberal all that is, Prime Minister Trudeau. Well, I will not go silently on this subject. I intend to make it a major campaigning priority, because this immoral, not amoral, this immoral policy of pumping money and weapons and support into everybody who's against anybody that we even temporarily don't like has to stop. It has to stop because it's immoral towards the people in the countries at which it is aimed, and because it is a disaster waiting to happen for our own people back at home. Because Shamima Begum will now have to come home. The government will not be able to sustain, now that we know what we know, their decision to take away her passport. And there have been many others. How many people do you think have come back from the ranks of ISIS in Syria, in Iraq, to Britain, to France, to Belgium, to Holland, to Germany? How many do you think? It's thousands upon thousands. And they walk among us, and they haven't changed their tune. They're merely silently biding their time, nursing their wrath against us to keep it warm. I told you that was the issue I wanted to deal with most this evening, but there are so many others. Why do we support Saudi Arabia to the nth degree? To the extent to which we send military officers to sit in their command and control cells, to guide them and target them on the poorest people in the entire Middle Eastern region, in Yemen. We support them so much, we let them buy our football clubs. We sell them weapons without let or hindrance. We roll out red carpets for them. When our leaders go there, they kiss them on the nose and then kiss them on the arse. Why? Do you know what Saudi Arabia has just done? This day, it sentenced a young woman, not that much older than Shamima Begum, to 34 years in prison for tweeting when she was a student in England against the Saudi royal dictatorship. 34 years for tweeting. A sentence imposed by the family that owns Twitter. How come I'm the only person hiding this point? Is this family fit and proper owners of the public square? What will they be doing next? Beheading us in their public square? Is this family fit and proper to own important assets in Britain and across the Western world, including media assets? Are they? This family that gives a woman, a girl, 34 years in jail for tweeting tweets that they didn't like? Is this family that owns Twitter the same company that hands out fake Russian-affiliated media labels to people like me? Is it them the Al Saud Twitter gang. You really couldn't make it up. And you couldn't make up my last story before I hand over to you. You thought Hunter Biden was a bad story for Joe. All those pictures that he took himself of him weighing cocaine, arguing with a hooker about exactly the weight of the cocaine, who took pictures of himself in bed with crack pipe in mouth and hookah under arm on his own laptop, a laptop which he then put into a repair shop to get fixed. And when the repair shop man happened upon all of this evidence that the son of the President of the United States, who by the way frequently flies on Air Force One, that you, the American taxpayer, are funding, he was called a Russian agent. It was called Russian disinformation. People were kicked off Twitter and other social media platforms for mentioning it. There was a complete ban in the run-up to the presidential election in 2020 on any mention of what was on Hunter Biden's own laptop. Pictures he took himself, of himself, were banned. And we know now from one of the people who banned them, an American journalist and editor, banned them. He openly admitted on television that he banned them to protect Joe Biden from adverse publicity that might have materially affected the outcome of the presidential race. How's that for interference in the domestic internal politics of the United States? You thought all of that was bad. You thought it was bad that Joe Biden on television boasted of how he'd gotten the chief prosecutor of the Ukraine sacked from his job because he wouldn't stop investigating Burisma, the company that paid Hunter Biden $50,000 a month for not working for them, just sitting on their board. You thought all that was bad. Well, you've not read Joe Biden's daughter's diary. Now, anybody who's watched all those videos, hours of them, of Joe Biden stroking the faces and smelling the hair of little girls ushered into his company, even in the Oval Office. Anyone who's watched those videos already knows that Joe Biden, the President of the United States, behaves, how shall I put it, inappropriately around other people's children. Ask yourself this: would you leave your little girl with Joe Biden alone? Would you? Would you let Joe Biden babysit your kids? Would you? Ask it yourself. Ask yourself that and give an honest answer. Would you? Well, according to his own daughter, his inappropriate behavior wasn't just towards other people's children. According to Joe Biden's daughter, written in her own hand in her own diary, he showered frequently and inappropriately with her. Now, I don't want to go to where the inappropriate showers meant. I don't want to think about what it was that this little girl, Biden's daughter, found so inappropriate about her father's behavior in the shower that she wrote about it in her diary. It's too much for me. I don't want to even speculate as to what this dirty, degenerate old man was doing inappropriately with his own daughter in the shower. I'm just going to say this to you. Is this man your leader? This Joe Biden? Is this man the leader of your free world? Is this the man that you're following over the cliff, destroying your own economy so that he can have a proxy fight with Russia? Is that the Joe Biden that you're following? If you are, if you do, there's really not much I can do for you. If you're not, you need to tell your neighbors. You need to tell your friends, your workmates. You need to tell everybody that you are in touch with that the United States of America is run by a degenerate crime family. The Biden crime family, who may indeed have been engaged in crimes hitherto unimagined, even by the standards of political crime families in the United States of America. I've just finished a magnificent HBO series called We Own This City, starring the incomparable, brilliant actor who surely will win the Best Supporting Actor award for television in this coming week. Surely Johnny Benton, who played Sergeant Wayne. He was magnificent. Wayne Jenkins was the epitome of the American state. The plainclothes unit, it's all true, by the way. The plainclothes unit he led was the United States in microcosm. What they did to Baltimore is what America has done to the world and is still doing to the world. Murdering, killing, corrupting, extorting, stealing, exploiting, terrorizing. That's what the plainclothes police in Baltimore did to the people of Baltimore, and it's exactly what the people of the world are now suffering from the United States, its armies, its government, and perhaps above all, its CIA, the new darlings of American liberals and progressives. This is the Galloway Show. It exists entirely free of charge, but on October the 12th, it will be replaced by a midweek edition of the mother of all talk shows. If you support me in the fighting fund to which I'm about to direct you, I want you to go now or after this show to the super chat mechanism on YouTube and make a donation. It can be $1. It can be £1. I mean that. But make a donation. And if you can make more, make more. Because I want liftoff on the 12th of October with the midweek mother of all talk shows. I don't want to go up like a rocket and come down like a burnt stick. I want liftoff. And that means I need a fighting fund. For the Wednesday show has no sponsor, although I'm still looking for one. And if I get one, you won't need to be donating anything ever again. But I don't have one. I've only got you. An audience which last week was well into six figures. despite all the efforts of Mr. Algorithm, particularly on TikTok. I've got my eye on you, TikTok, TikTok, TikTok. I'm talking about you, TikTok, TikTok, TikTok. Let's see what the audience have to say, Gayatri. Moriokiri gives $50 and says free Palestine. Wow, what a donation to start off with. Thank you very much indeed, and free Palestine indeed. Isn't it funny? My team Celtic got fined £60,000 because their supporters flew Palestinian flags at a football game, and on Saturday every single Premiership manager was forced to wear a Ukrainian flag on their breast pocket. Flags are okay as long as it's the right flags. You get my drift. Let's see. Naresh Rahal gives 5 English pounds or British pounds. Thank you very much, Naresh. Spiritualize politics, socialize business, secularize religion. That's a quote from Siri Gurdev. Thank you, Naresh, for that kind donation. Let's see what else there is. Pat Scanlon, a win for your beloved Celtic tonight. Well, Celtic are going great guns, man. 9-0 they won at the weekend. Not since Pearl Harbor has there been a Japanese strike force like Celtic's front 3 Japanese. Alberto Macatir, I read your remarks about Kosovo in Parliament in 1999 on Hansard. You were very ahead of the game about what NATO were up to and the terrible precedent they were setting. Thanks, Alberto. Not a lot of people know that. I'm glad you brought it to their attention. I was recently in Belgrade. I'm going again quite soon. I may actually have to move there in order to work and earn a living. I have great feeling for the Serbian people, much maligned, much traduced, and for all the wrong reasons. Serbian people are fine people, good friends, bad enemies. Think Mitrovic, think Nemanja Vidic. Let's see what else we've got. Rapid Download says, she was underage at the time, and you know how propaganda works. I don't believe a word of it. She's a victim, and we all know what happens to Western assets after the West is finished using them. She was underage at the time. She was a young schoolgirl. It's now clear that she was smuggled out of Bethnal Green, that I used to represent as a member of Parliament, all the way to Syria by Canadian intelligence. And the British government covered it up. Doesn't get much worse than that, does it? Let's see. Zombie in the Air says, Jesus Christ, as if funding them wasn't bad enough, they were supplying brides too. Exactly. Child brides, schoolgirl brides. They're also moral, aren't they? About Muslim grooming gangs, Pakistani grooming gangs. This was a Canadian grooming gang that was smuggling schoolgirls as brides of ISIS. Just think about that. I can't read that. It's in Russian, but thank you. No, it's in Serbian. I very much beg your pardon. Although the Serbian and the Russian people are very, very close. But my Serbian friend says we would be proud to have you living here. Well, I'd be proud to live there, and I'd be able to go and watch Red Star. Hope you're not a partisan supporter. Go and see Red Star Belgrade every other week. And who knows, maybe even bring my football protege son and sign him up for Red Star Belgrade. Wouldn't that be something? Rapid Download again says, you can't make people stateless, unacceptable. Whose responsibility do they then become? The military, is that the plan? Countries must take responsibility for their citizens. Well, the British dumped her on Bangladesh that she'd never set foot in her life because her grandparents were from Bangladesh. Now, I despise this young woman. I abhor and spit upon the crimes of which she was a collaborator. But the British government was lying by covering up the role that Canada played in smuggling this child as a child bride to an ISIS terrorist. Doesn't get much worse, as I keep saying. The wee man says, if it was a 15-year-old white girl, the West journalists would be saying, oh, she looks just like us. We need to let her go. By the way, I never advocated letting her go. I said at the very beginning, check, that she and all these other terrorists should be handed over to the government in Damascus. She committed crimes on Syrian soil, albeit crimes that were facilitated by, would have been impossible without the facilitation of Western governments, including, in her case, the Canadian government. Canada. Who'd have thought it? Nice, cuddly Canada. Human rights Canada. Liberal Canada. Smuggling child brides for ISIS in Syria. Do the Canadian people care about this? I'm asking that. Let's see what else there is. James B. Alert. George, can you spell it out? Did the UK government in some shape or form know what the Manchester Arena bomber was up to in the days up to the explosion? I'm not saying that, James. I've got no evidence at all that would support that. And I personally don't believe that. But that's not the point. This man, I don't say his name, I refuse to say his name, who murdered all these children in the Manchester Arena, was a ticking time bomb constructed years before by the British government, by the government of Gordon Brown and the government of Theresa May, both of them, constructed a terrorist cell in Manchester, a city extremely close to my heart, where some of my children live. This terrorist cell was assembled there by the British state. They imagined that all the explosions would happen in Libya. It just so happened that once they got the taste for blood in Libya, it didn't satisfy them. And they came back to Manchester and took some of our children's blood. That's what I'm saying, James. Jagzilla says, are you a Freemason, Galloway? I'm a Roman Catholic in good standing and cannot be a Freemason. Next. Sven the Viking gives 20 SEK. George Galloway at his best. Stunningly incisive. Thanks, Sven. I very much appreciate that. Gubarwala says, Georgie Porgy, what's wrong with foreigners like Saudis buying British soccer teams? The white regimes under the guise of the British India Company have owned countries. Get your priorities straight. Well, I really needed that lesson in the history of British imperialism. I'm deeply grateful to you for pointing out to me, who spent the last 55 years crying against, raging against the crimes of British imperialism. Thank you. You've set me straight after all this time at this advanced age. I'm now the wiser, thanks to you. YouTube user says, guessing someone wants to bring up the daughter story now to bring down Biden. Why now and not before? Well, that might be true. If I was the American ruling elite, I'd want to bring down Biden too, because even if the Republican Party fielded Yogi Bear in 2024, they'll beat Joe Biden. Problem actually is they'll also beat Kamala Harris. Yogi Bear and Boo Boo, standing for the Republicans, would defeat Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. So it may be that the story is emerging. But if it looks like a duck, walks like a duck, and quacks like a duck, it's probably Joe Biden showering inappropriately with his daughter. Hey, I've frozen on the screen. I hope you're still hearing me. I noticed that my countdown froze at 18. I hope this show has actually gone ahead. Syed R. Maswood channel gives 50 American dollars. Thank you, Syed. I appreciate it very much indeed. A most handsome donation. Alan Everest gives 10 American dollars. Thank you, Alan. Most kind of you. Jerry Williams gives 5 British pounds, for which, again, I'm extremely grateful. You can carry on giving after the show on the super chat mechanism, but also on our website, which is moats.tv, and go to the donate channel. And if you can, make it a recurring donation. Even $1 a week will make a big difference to us. And of course, if you want to help me feed my children, I haven't been paid any wages for 6 months, you can support me on patreon.com/George Galloway, and I'm deeply and enduringly grateful to all of those who've supported me on Patreon. My pension and Patreon is what I live on now, which is why I might have to go and work in Belgrade. Gorgonzola, very good friend of the show and regular donor, sends $5. Please have Catherine Austin Fitz on MOATS to talk about the $21 trillion missing, stolen from the US Treasury since 1997. It's fascinating stuff. Well, it's fascinated me already. So Gayatri, I'm sure, will take note of that name and we'll try and follow that up. We've still got 15 minutes. Lars Svensson gives SEK 200. There's a photo of me and Lukashenko, which may or may not have been doctored for a laugh. Surely it should be enough for a BLR state-affiliated stamp. Anything's worth an affiliated stamp. I mean, I'm taking legal action against Twitter. It begins with a simple question. Are you saying that this day, Mr. Galloway is Russian state-affiliated media? The only answer could be no, as not only am I not Russian state-affiliated media, I'm not affiliated to anybody media. I'm not even getting any wages. And therefore the answer would have to be no. And when the second question was, well, why have you still got Russian state-affiliated media attached to his every tweet, whether it's about Manchester United, the birth of a granddaughter, the beauty of nature, or about politics? Why do you stamp it Russian state-affiliated media? And as a result of that stamp, why have you ensured that only 10 to 12% of his 441,000 followers ever see any of his tweets? Collapse of stout party. Twitter better settle with me out of court and quickly, because I'm amassing quite a dossier here about the owners of Twitter, including the Saudi royal family, about the Elon Musk affair, about the level of ghost accounts being boasted by Twitter, about the number of bots, about the foreign government penetration of your company, where you're dancing to the tune of governments like the Saudi Arabian government, like the Israeli government, like the Indian government, all three governments having been found, caught, suborning your officials. I'll tell you what, Twitter, if I was you, I'd settle with me handsomely very, very soon, or I'm going to enjoy my day in court with you. That I promise. Have I got time for more? I do. Cameron McDowell gives £4 49 pence. Thank you, Cameron, my countryman, my fellow Scot. While people argued over the Begum narrative, us MOATS viewers knew the shenanigans were afoot. We just didn't expect to be vindicated so quickly. Very well put, Cameron. You know, I was born in a time when you had to wait for the history books to vindicate you. Now, in the speed of media in this era, and the number of clever people that we have on our side means that you get vindicated in your own lifetime. You get vindicated when you still look roughly the same in the picture as you did when you made the initial revelation. If I wrote, as I might, another autobiography, my first one was called I'm Not the Only One. This one would be, I was right about everything. I was right about virtually everything, certainly everything important. And I lived to see that proved. Thanks to God, of course, but thanks to those of you who loyally supported me throughout. Thanks, Cameron, for that. Lessons for Life gives £9.11. Thanks very much. I recently purchased a cheap Star-Spangled Banner online. When it arrived, the stars and stripes were the wrong colour. Turns out it was a false flag. Very well. That was worth 11 quid. C gives Australian dollars, I think, $7.99. Thank you. Good day, George. Aussie train drivers, with the support of their unions, have been striking hard and refusing to drive foreign-built trains on Fridays. Thanks. That's a bit of a strange strike, but I'll never cross a picket line, whatever it's about. David Kelly gives 10 British pounds. Thank you, David. Great work, George. Up the Celts, free Palestine. You got it all in one, David. Anybody here seen Kelly? Kelly from the Isle of Man. That was one of my mother's favourite New Year songs. Sven the Viking gives SEK 20. Thank you very much. Tonight you're on fire, George. This is my second donation. Indeed it is, Sven. You'll always be my favourite Viking. Vikings were around where I live now, by the way. There's quite a few Viking names of little hamlets and villages. Murder and rapine, but you left some good genes in the local population. Giles McComish gives £10. Thank you, Giles. See you in Stockport. Just bought my tickets. Well, the tickets are going incredibly well. I mean, when I say like hotcakes, I mean like really hot, really good cakes. It's at the Garrick Theatre, and there's the billboard for it. Get your tickets from ticketsource.co.uk. Gayatri will be filming at it, interviewing people in the audience. We'll show those interviews in the subsequent edition of the Mother of All Talk Shows. So it's the mother of all roadshows, and it's on the 7th of November. But before that, on the 12th of September, so not long now, I'm speaking at a fringe meeting at the TUC Congress in Brighton. So if you're anywhere near the Brighton area, come along and see me and my friends speak. I'll also be on the streets of Birmingham, Sparkbrook and Balsall Heath, quite a lot actually, in the next 35 days, because we in the Workers' Party triggered a local council by-election there. We garnered enough signatures, very easily actually, to prompt a by-election in 35 days from now. And we have a candidate so outstanding, I dare to believe that he will win. Dr. Phil Bevan is a former aide to Jeremy Corbyn, the former Labour leader, worked in Jeremy Corbyn's office in Parliament. He is an intellectual, a worker, and an activist of supreme quality, and he'll be standing for us in Sparkbrook, Balsall Heath. And therefore, if you like me, if you support me, you need to support him, not just with your vote, but make a donation to his election fund and be out there on the street. Help us deliver leaflets, knock on doors, canvass people. I'll be outside the mosques in the area every Friday of the campaign. We're going to make this a cost of living crisis election. It will be the first such election in Britain, and Dr. Phil is our candidate. I hope you will support him. Still got 5 minutes left. Kublai Khan, what a great name, gives £5. Galloway, it seems you have become the main trend. I've always been quite trendy, you know. I was looking for a pristine white handkerchief to put here in my top pocket this evening, but I didn't find one. I'm asking my wife to try and get one from me for Sunday. Rapid Download gives £10 Thank you. The BRICS should just ban trade with the US, then more countries would join that club, including the UK possibly. Ever the optimist I am. Yeah, definitely. But BRICS is growing and growing. Argentina has already joined. Jokowi, the president of Indonesia, the fourth most populous country in the world, the largest Muslim country in the world, has said that he will join the BRICS. The BRICS is growing and growing. The sun is rising in the east and in the south and setting in the north and west. It's a pity. It didn't have to be that way. It really didn't. Our leaders are idiots as well as knaves. They are fools. Fragile gives NOK 200. Thank you very much for that, Fragile. Seems like Europe will experience the same crises Yugoslavia went through during the 90s. Inflation, sanctions, hunger. Talk about karma. I guess this would be the perfect example of it. It's true, Fragile, that in the past, the weapon of sanctions only hurt other people. This is the first time it has caused mass suffering, which has only just begun. Immiseration, fuel poverty, food poverty, mass unemployment, and a bitter, bitter cold winter in the countries that imposed the sanctions on somebody else. If that's not a lesson, I don't know what would be. And Africola, what a great name, gives BGN 5. I've no idea what BGN is, but I'm grateful for all 5 of them, Africola. Thank you so much for everything you've been doing for us, George. Keep up the good work. Greetings from the people of Bulgaria. Viva Jorge Dimitrov, one of my favorite men in all history, one of the greatest performances in history was the performance of Georgy Dimitrov in the Reichstag trial in Berlin. To read his eloquence under pressure, on trial by the Nazi regime, facing the death penalty, Dimitrov's brilliance shines out through the ages. I love the people of Bulgaria, and they deserve a much better government than they have had of late. Gorgonzola gives $5 American. Thank you. Whitney Webb from Mint Press has just written a 2-volume book on Epstein's vast blackmailing empire, ties to Iran-Contra as well. Well, I'm in second place to no man in my admiration for Whitney Webb and for Mint Press. So I'll definitely be checking that out. My picture has frozen in a most uncomfortable and unusual grimace. Jonathan Wood gives £10. Another brilliant and illuminating show with great questions asked about the motives of Western governments meddling in the affairs of other countries. Thank you, Jonathan, for your kind words and for your donation. Room for just one more, maybe. It's the witching hour coming up. No, there's no more. So I'll thank you kindly for all of your donations. Please keep donating so that on the 12th of October, we can take off like a rocket. Not one of those rockets on a stick, a real Soyuz, a real Sputnik, a real Soviet era rocket that went all the way to space. Thank you very much for watching. Join me on Sunday at 7 p.m. UK time for the mother of all talk shows. From Gayatri and me, I wish you a very good night.